Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the Navigator suite of behavioral assessments and a very unique behavioral mapping process. To introduce myself, my name is Craig Slavin. I am the founder of The Navigator, and I personally have been involved in business for over 40 years. I've owned my own business. I've run other companies. And I know firsthand what it's like to sit there as a business owner. Prior to that, I held many corporate positions where I was VP of operations or VP of training. And in some cases, because of my franchise background, I was even involved in the franchising space. I'm also the author of 2 books, Entrepreneurship is Full of BS, and Franchising is Full of BS. No, not that BS. Behavioral sciences. And what I'm going to share with you today is what I've learned about what it takes to be successful in running your own business. But first, we're going to ask you some rhetorical questions that we obviously know the answer to. But are you tired of having underperformers around you? People that are not reaching their goals, whether it's personal or professional, and goals that either they've set for themselves or you have set for them? Are you experiencing the high cost of turnover? I know the answer to that. I have, and I looked for a solution so that it didn't cost me a lot of money for making a bad hire. And are you still discovering what your own strengths are, your own internal strengths and weaknesses? Because it all starts with you. And once you know yourself and you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, then it's easy to play to the strengths and bolster the weaknesses by surrounding yourself with people that have what you haven't got. And are you still looking for the right employees? We always are looking for the right employees. But how do you really know if somebody's a good fit? By looking at their resume or even interviewing them, because people behave differently during interviews. And in a lot of cases, the resumes are impressive, and we wouldn't necessarily want the person that the resume's talking about. We'd want the person who wrote the resume, because they're the real creative people. And you could be out there looking for a job. Now, how do you know what industry? How do you know what kind of business you should be working for? What would play to your strengths? Well, we're going to show you. The problem is, though, is that talent management and the selection processes are very outdated, antiquated, and ineffective. They really don't work. The Department of Labor, as I'll show you, has some very interesting statistics regarding the high cost of turnover and what it costs to actually train somebody and have them get into the workforce, and if they're not a good fit, having to replace that person and retrain somebody else. Another problem is that people attempt to measure personality in terms of, is this person good for us? But, the truth is, it's not about personality. And it's whether or not somebody's a good fit. And we're going to show you what a good fit is. So consider this. How to be predictive. We all scratch our heads wondering why that person didn't work out, or why that person didn't reach the goals and the objectives when you had so much hope in them. Well, we're going to show you how to be predictive and how to select the right people. And there is a secret to it, and we're going to reveal that secret for you. And then once you know you've got the right person, how to create effective training programs so that it's resonating with that particular person. All of this will result in reduced turnover. We have the facts and the statistics to prove this. And by having the right fit, by having people that fit into your organization and your culture results in higher levels of productivity. That results in greater team building efforts so that you've got people on your bus that make complete sense and energize and empower the other people on that bus. All of this results in one thing, and that's market share, increased market share. Market share can be increased by having the right people, and it could be decreased and eroded by not having the right people. Now, I know this is true because we conduct a statistical analysis of our clients for every client that we come across. And what's interesting is if it's a sales organization or if it's an organization that has a distributed workforce like a franchise, I always ask the CEOs, okay, out of your entire population, what percentage are high performers? What percentage are mid performers? And what percentage are poor performers? What's really interesting is it's almost robotic. They all come back to me and they say, oh, it's a third, a third, a third. Well, I can tell you that's not true. But let's just say it is true. What that does mean is that 2/3 of that distribution system, 2/3 of that workforce are underperformers. How can you gain valuable market share when you're surrounded by underperformers? It's just not going to happen. So these are actual statistics. If I told you what brands they were, you would know them. And, in some cases, it's for single unit operators, and for some cases, it's multi-unit operators, sales organizations. It really doesn't matter who we work with and what size and level of maturity that organization is at. But I can tell you that out in the real world, it's a very small percentage of high performers and a huge preponderance of mid and poor performers, to the point where the entrepreneur business owner, such as yourself, doesn't know what to do. You're constantly scratching your head. What do I do next? Well, and as I mentioned, the Department of Labor has some very interesting statistics on what the costs are of a bad hire. And it can be enormous. In some cases, they're saying it could run as much as 30% of the salaries that you pay to the individual. So the higher paid individual, the higher the costs are of replacing that individual. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to get the right employees and how to be predictive and create effective teams. We're going to share with you, if you're seeking a business of your own, how to find the right business or how to find the right franchise for you, because it's all about fit. It's not about passion. It's not about whether or not you like frozen yogurt. It's not about whether or not you like a particular product or service. It's whether or not you have the right stuff to run that business model. And we're going to identify if an individual has the right stuff to be an entrepreneur. There is a specific profile of an entrepreneur business owner. And I might add that that profile is very different than the profile of somebody who's going to buy a franchise or buy into a distributorship. Because when you have a distributed workforce, you're looking at people that aren't necessarily high entrepreneurs, high-scoring entrepreneurs, but people that want somebody to do a lot of the work for them so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can simply step in and run that and manage that business. And we're going to look at and identify for you how to identify the right vocation, how to identify the right occupation for yourself. And I can tell you that the statistics show that approximately 72% of all the kids that graduate college are never employed in the area of study. And it's because they were forced into a particular area of study or they thought it was the right area of study for them. And really, it's like rolling the dice. Well, we can show how to be predictive and know what you should be looking for. And because we deal with fit, and fit it's what it's all about, we can even identify if a particular potential business partner, spouse, life partner is a good fit for yourself in advance, on a predictive basis, not on a reactive basis. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about selection, effective selection training, and performance enhancement. How can we do that and do it in such an effective and statistically valid way? Well, a little bit of history about the Navigator is that I was a business person and I needed a solution, because every time we would hire somebody or every time we would recruit a franchisee, if it was a franchise client, we would all scratch our heads wondering if this person was a good fit or not. And the problem is you don't really know if they're a good fit or not until generally 18 to 24 months after they've been brought into that particular organization. And if they're a good fit, it's amazing. If it's a bad fit, it's the worst monster you've ever seen. So we looked at, and I was blessed, I was led to developing a mastermind of industrial, clinical, organizational, and behavioral psychologists. We researched every single one of the tools and assessments and profiling instruments we could get our hands on, and we found some very interesting commonalities, but they weren't giving us the information that we needed. We launched the Navigator in 1997. Some of our early clients still use the Navigator in their growth programs. We've now evolved into a predictive suite of behavioral fit assessments that have many different applications. The basic core of the Navigator does not change, but the results, the deliverables, the area of focus for that particular report is customized, and it varies from client to client. What is unique about the Navigator is we don't focus in on personality, and I'll show you why. What we focus in on is skills, values, and behavior. And I'll share with you, there's basically only 3 skills in any business. Values are very important. Values are the core and the root of all decisions and all activities that are performed by people. We'll get into this a little later in the presentation. What the Navigator does is the Navigator, unlike the others, can create populations, which means we can stack assessments for a particular company, for a particular role, for a particular position, and create a population. And then inside that population, we can create benchmarks. And benchmarks, or we call them the sweet spots, is where the high performers are going to score. And that way, it enables you to be predictive. It's scientific, it's objective, and it has a high degree of accuracy. In fact, we've been told by independent sources we have between a 90 and a 95% probability of being able to identify high performers. So here's the difference between what the Navigator does and what some of the personality profiles do. So imagine looking up into the sky at a jet airliner. That jet airliner produces a contrail. That contrail is what comes out of the airplane. And, that's personality. What personality is how that person is viewed by others. Well, you're going to find, if you haven't already, there's very little correlation between personality and performance. What the Navigator does is we go inside the airplane. We want to look at the DNA of that particular individual that will create that kind of contrail. Because once we know that, we know the secret. of who they are, what they do, why they do what they do, how they make decisions, and what's important to them. And once we know that, then we can better accommodate them. We can better communicate with them in ways that resonate with them. So what we want to do is talk about the old versus the new. You know, the old way of doing things doesn't work. It may have worked in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, but it does not work in today's environment. Not only that, it's not about just an assessment. It's about an entire solution that gives you a 360 view of an individual and not just an assessment. An assessment's only as good as the information that it provides you or how you interpret it. And by the way, some of these assessment companies have their own distributed workforce. They use the same assessment, but the interpretations can vary from company to company to company. So the Navigator is very different. It's very different in how it's structured compared to these others. For instance, it's a free choice assessment, meaning you're given questions and you have 5 multiple choice answers to choose from. It's not a forced choice assessment, and I'm sure some of you have already taken some of these forced choice assessments where you're given a question and 4 choices to choose from, and you have to choose one of them in order to move on to the next question. Well, what if none of them resonate with you, or conversely, all of them resonate with you? You have to choose one. That's a forced choice assessment. And by the way, the statisticians and the research shows you cannot take forced choice assessments and build and create and stack and create populations. They're individual to the survey taker. Because we have a free choice assessment, we can create this population. And you'll see once the population is created, it reveals all sorts of dynamics. And the population then allows for benchmarks. And we call them sweet spots. But it creates metrics of which people then are going to be compared to that are new hires. The sweet spots will identify performance levels. And you'll be able to see on a predictive basis if somebody's going to be a high performer, a mid performer, or a poor performer. And it enables the Navigator to compare an individual results to the sweet spots. You'll know instantly, is this person going to be a good fit? Now, there's a lot of forced choice assessments that are out there. You probably have taken some of them. I have. And, I don't need to name who they are. They're out there. They don't really work for selection. In fact, if you go up onto the websites, DISC, Myers-Briggs, and a number of the others tell you it's not good to be used for selection purposes. Coaching, training, because you'll get some insights into the individual, yes, but not for selection purposes. Now, this is a very significant difference about the Navigator compared to all of the other assessments. This allows us to group the assessments, create the population, and then upon completion of the benchmarking and the sweet spots, we can compare people to those results and determine in advance on a predictive basis if they're a good fit. So the population is the key. And what we do is once the population is created, we'll then create a scorecard. Now, this scorecard is customized to every client. And you'll see that over here, this is the name of the survey participant. And here's how their scores came out in the Navigator. And I'll share with you the Navigator scoring process because there's 4 profiles. And the scores come out very easily to read between 0 and 100%. But the key is these columns right here. These columns right here represent a company's own internal KPIs. Key performance indicators. How do you measure success? It could be by sales volume. It could be customer service levels. It could be how they meet and greet customers. It could be anything you want, as long as it's objective and you can objectively measure their performance in those KPIs. And you simply measure it 1, 2, or 3, high, mid, or low. Ace Hardware had 22. We don't really care how many you had. Sears had 14. Some companies had even more. Some companies had even less. Once we have all of this information in, then we do a statistical analysis of all this data, and we're able to create a high performer profile. We then come back in and color code the scorecard, and you can see what differentiates the high performers, the mid performers, and the poor performers. If there's a lot of red, you don't really want to hire somebody that resembles that profile. If there's a lot of yellow, it's close. You be careful, but it's the green that you want. You want people that score in that sweet spot. These are going to be your highest performers. So this enables the navigator to compare the results. You're now able to be predictive. And here's how the results occur. As I mentioned, there's 4 profiles for the navigator. It's a quadrant-based system. Once we've done the statistical analysis, we load into our unique proprietary computer system the values. And we can insert minimums and maximums. What this says is this is where the highest performers score in each of the 4 navigator profiles. The accomplisher, which is the drive, the influencer, which is the communication skills, the associator, which is the interpersonal skills, and the contributor, which is leadership skills. When somebody takes the navigator, it takes less than 10 minutes to take. You'll see the results within a matter of seconds. In fact, it'll beat you to your inbox. And those results are going to show you where that individual scores in each of the 4 profiles. It's going to tell you whether or not that person's a keeper or not. It's then going to identify their strengths and their weaknesses. What's really interesting and where the navigator excels is that these sweet spots change. They change from client to client, role to role, industry to industry. So the navigator is no longer a generic psychometric tool. It is now a customized assessment and behavioral mapping process designed for you. So again, as I mentioned, it's a quadrant-based system. And what we're measuring is we're measuring the recipe of an individual's value system, how and why they make decisions the way they do, what's important to them. Because once you understand that, then you can anticipate and be predictive in how to work with them. So it's a very interesting process. But the key is, as I mentioned, we measure skills, values, and behavior. And honestly, there's only 3 skills in any business. There's sales and marketing skills, the ability to meet, greet, and exceed the customer's expectations. There's business administration and HR management, the ability to recruit, manage, and motivate teams of people. And then there's the technical skills. The technical skills is, the application of how do you fix a muffler? How do you deliver a particular product or service? How do you cut hair? Whatever it might be. And that oftentimes is the easiest part of educating a new hire. But the key is that very few people on the planet are going to be good at all 3. And if they are good at all 3, they're going to make pretty good business people. But generally, somebody's good at one of them, aside from the technical, because that can be taught. Either somebody's sales and marketing or somebody's people-oriented. You can't really be both because one is sales and marketing and the other is very detail-oriented. And if you've ever dealt with salespeople, they're generally not detail-oriented. The key now is values. So here's the thing. Whether you accept it or not, whether you believe it or not, we're all wired differently, just like computer software. But what we all have in common is a value system. And that value system is instilled upon us generally at a very early age, either by our parents or by somebody of major influence to the family. And the secret to this is that whenever a decision has to be made or activities need to be performed, again, whether you believe it or not or accept it or not, we dig deep into our value system. We try to anchor whatever that decision or activity is with something that we've experienced in the past, positive or negative. And then it comes back out. All of this happens in nanoseconds. You can't track it. But when it comes out in the form of behavior that's congruent to an individual's value system and is consistent with their skills. It's that simple. But it took us a long time to figure out how to decipher the value system, how to break it down into individual components, sort of like the recipe of a cake. Now, because of the way we do this, we're able to create the population for a company. We're then able to look at how somebody fits against that, and then using this insight, we can determine whether or not an individual is a good fit or not. And the solutions that we provide are for an entire organization, for a job. It doesn't really matter. The Navigator has so many different applications, it's amazing because of the way it's set up. But the key is that we can tell if somebody's a good fit or not a good fit. And once you know the characteristics of somebody that's not a good fit, you don't want to bring that kind of person on. It's not a good fit for you. And once you know the characteristics of somebody who's a good fit, you know who they are, where they are, what they listen to, what they read, what their patterns are, what words to use, the colors, and the tonality of the communications with them. So it's all about effective team building. And here's how we go about it. All companies are really based on cylinders. We call them the 8 cylinders. There's operations, marketing and advertising, legal, sales, customer service, financial, organizational, human resources, IT, information technology, image identity, and branding. Each of these cylinders is as equally as important as the other. And as your business progresses, each of these need to be addressed. But the key in order for effective team building is the organizational human resources, because if you bring on people that are not a good fit, there isn't a training program on the planet that's going to turn them into a high performer. It's just not in the cards. On the other hand, we have a 90 to a 95% accuracy and ability to determine on a predictive basis if somebody's going to be a high performer or not. This is very important. Now, in terms of recruiting people, there's a lot of ways in which you can. Certainly now with the internet, there's all sorts of job boards, and there's this and there's that, so that you can gather the resumes. Well, you know, as I said, it's not about the resumes. It's about whether or not you're bringing on people and the right people onto your bus. It's all about fit. So we've been able to apply the Navigator to independent entrepreneur, business owners, sales professionals, office managers, receptionists, any customer service specialists, business brokers. It doesn't matter the role, because what we end up doing is we end up quantifying it. But here's what we don't do. We don't treat people like as if you walked into the grocery store, into the vegetable section, and you only had potatoes to choose from or onions to choose from. Each person is different. Each person needs to be treated differently. Each person at each job level needs to be treated differently. We show you how to do that. So the Navigator, it's really very interesting. It's evolved. And we have the Entrepreneurship Navigator. And this is designed for people that are business owners or want to be business owners. And then we have the Business Navigator. Once you are a business owner, the Navigator then becomes an effective tool for recruiting employees, building teams, creating an effective culture. We also have the Franchise Navigator. And that's where it all started for us. It started for us in franchising 20 years ago, in the recruitment and the selection of franchisees. I can share with you the success stories. It's amazing. We have the Sales Navigator, which is designed for sales and marketing companies. We have the Employee Navigator, so that you've got people in support positions that are the right people. And we've got the Vocation Navigator to help kids understand what they should be learning, the areas of educational focus, as well as for people that are job seekers so that they can find the right job. And we have the Compatibility Navigator, because remember, it's all about fit. And we have in our system the ability to merge and combine assessments together so that we can see where the stress is going to be, where the compatibility is going to be amongst people. It gives amazing insights, and it works. Now, we don't necessarily like to do all the talking. We let the clients do the talking, because they're the ones that are experiencing the success stories. This particular individual is building a law firm, and he's got multiple locations. He's very strong at what he does. Amazing guy. Former F-16 fighter pilot, DOD official, former state senator, knows his stuff, but he's a horrible judge of people. He uses the Navigator to recruit receptionists, paralegals, lawyers, so that he creates harmony within his organization. This happens to be Shelby Yastro. He's a former executive VP and general counsel for McDonald's. He was on the board of directors for Great Clips for Hair when we did a number for them in the late 1999, early 2000s, and put them in the right direction. He said to me numerous times, I wish that McDonald's we had the ability to use this kind of tool. We have all sorts of clients that have had successes, ranging from Window Genie, who says that when he selects people that fit the Navigator profile, it's the difference of $120,000 a year in individual sales. Sears, with their entrepreneurial businesses, have been using the Navigator since day one. They immediately experienced a 38% increase in same-store sales within the first 2 years. When we started with them, there were 122 locations. There's now about 1,800 locations, and the entire division is generating over $2 billion in revenues. ArcPoint Labs, which is a external DNA lab testing service for businesses, their franchisees are breaking even in 1/3 the amount of time as before they started using the Navigator. They love the Navigator, and nobody's brought into their system unless they fit the sweet spot. It's that simple. Regis, which is Supercuts, and their family of brands, they have 10,000 locations, 10,000 salons. They tell us that the Navigator eliminates the guesswork. They don't have to think about it. They can just look at the results and know instantly. We did the same thing with Yum, with the Pizza Hut, KFC, and Long John Silver's. We understood their profile of franchisee. Did the same thing with Buffalo Wild Wings. That was a lot of fun. And Kilwin's Chocolates, where their first year sales have increased tremendously since using the Navigator. A lot of clients, a lot of case studies, a lot of history. We'd like to show you how it will work for you, and it will. So once the assessment is done, that's where the behavioral mapping kicks in. And this was actually the suggestion of clients 15, 16 years ago. And what we did was we created an algorithm that we own, and it takes their scores, if you remember, the 0 to 100%, where they respond and score within those grid marks, and then it drills down into 9 categories: entrepreneurship, leadership, salesmanship, customer service, operational efficiencies, accounting acumen, people development, delegation, and time management. It goes across the 4 profiles, identifies if it's a strength or a weakness in each of these 9 categories. So you end up with an entire 360 view in terms of the competencies and the performance levels that can be expected by a particular individual. It's really a very interesting process. Nobody else does this. Now what we do is we take all of these elements and we use Merriam-Webster's definition of culture, which is a set of attitudes, values, goals, and practices. And now we're able to identify the culture of a particular company. So now you're able to bring in, on a predictive basis, people that fit the organization, high levels of performance, and can add to, instead of eroding, the culture. Then what happens is a report is generated. And as I mentioned, it takes less than 10 minutes to take the Navigator. The results will appear in your inbox in the form of a report where it goes into the explanation of the Navigator. It goes down the 9 categories across the 4 profiles, identifies if it's a strength or a weakness, and it then offers coaching and training recommendations in each of these areas to increase performance and productivity. So now the Navigator's not just descriptive, it's also prescriptive. It'll help you move this person along and protect your investment. For individuals, we use the Navigator much like a personal GPS system. See, we believe that the reason why most people never reach their objectives and their goals in life or in business is because of one of 2 reasons. One, the goals and objectives are just not reachable. They're not obtainable. They're too far away. Or if they were realistic, what they don't have is a starting point. So think of your GPS system in your smartphone or on your car. It's going to ask you, where do you want to go? That's your destination. That's your goals, your objectives. And then it's going to ask you, what's your starting point? Where should we pick you up? Most people don't have that until they take the Navigator. And the Navigator becomes the starting point for their own personal GPS system. See, there is a better way. And it's all about fit. It's not about how good somebody's resume looks. It's all about fit. So call us today. We have certified Navigator professionals all over the country. They're trained in various different disciplines of the Navigator, but they're all certified in the Navigator. Call us at 800-378-5924. We'd love to work with you. We'd love to help you. Or visit us on the web at www.navigatorhub.com. Start using the Navigator. It's very efficient, it's very accurate, and stop rolling the dice. That's very expensive, very time-consuming, and honestly, it just plain doesn't work. 1-800-378-5924.